Hello friends and welcome to my channel. Friends, in today's video we are going to discuss Sir Philip Sidney as a critic, and we are going to discuss the main arguments of Sir Philip Sidney in his important critical work An Apology for Poetry or Defense of Poesy. Right? So who was Sir Philip Sidney? In fact, he was a multicolored and multifaceted personality. He was an established poet, courtier, soldier and critic. He was born on 30th November 1554 and he died on 17th October 1586. So he lived a very short life. He lived around 31 years. But he is already an established poet and critic in the history of English poetry and English criticism. Friends, very interesting thing for us to know is that Sidney was a soldier and he was injured in the Battle of Zutphen, which was fought between the United Provinces of the Netherlands, aided by England, against Spain. So, after being injured in the war, Sidney died in a few days. Right? But we are concerned right now with Sir Philip Sidney as a critic, and particularly his important critical work, An Apology for Poetry. Why did Sidney write this essay? And what are the main arguments of Sidney in this essay? Let us try to discuss that. Right? Now, during the times of Sir Philip Sidney, there was a Puritanist and a satirist by the name of Stephen Gosson, and he was notorious for criticizing poets and all imaginative literature. Right? So Stephen Gosson wrote an essay entitled The School of Abuse in 1579, and to instigate Sir Philip Sidney, Stephen Gosson dedicated this essay in a very satirical way to Sir Philip Sidney. So, being a Puritanist and satirist, Stephen Gosson, in his essay entitled The School of Abuse, lambasted poets and poetry in the fashion of Plato. And he dedicated this long essay to Sir Philip Sidney in a very satirical way, because Sir Philip Sidney was considered to be one of the foremost poets of his times. So, mark how Stephen Gosson dedicated his essay to Sir Philip Sidney. in what way Stephen Gosson used the dedicating words, right? So Stephen Gosson dedicated the School of Abuse to Sir Philip Sidney and wrote, "To Gentleman Master Philip Sidney, wishing Sidney health of body, wealth of mind, and good success in godly affairs." So, dedication is generally considered to be a very commendable thing. But here, Stephen Gosson dedicated his essay to Sir Philip Sidney in a very satirical way, wishing Sir Philip Sidney wealth of mind, implying that Sir Philip Sidney, being a poet, did not have enough of knowledge. And then wishing Sir Philip Sidney good success in godly affairs, implying that being a poet, Sir Philip Sidney is not spiritual, right? And whole essay of Stephen Gosson was an attack on poets and poetry, right? So, Sir Philip Sidney felt a need to defend poets and poetry because he was a soldier, and the dharma of the soldier, the duty of the soldier is also to shield or to defend whatever is good. And that is why Sidney wrote an apology for poetry in defense of poets and poetry, in defense of all practitioners of imaginative literature and imaginative literature itself, right? So Sidney wrote this essay in approximately 1580, but Sidney's essay was posthumously published in 1595, right? So how Sidney has written this essay? Sidney has written this essay following the classical argument and including so many rhetorical devices in his essay, right? So what are the main arguments of Sidney in an apology for poetry? What does Sidney say in defense of poets and poetry? Right? Let us try to discuss that. And my dear friends, in order to simplify the arguments which are propounded by Sir Philip Sidney, I am just highlighting two major points that Sidney talks about. One is nature of poetry. How is the nature of poetry according to Sidney? What is poetry? And second main point is functions of poetry. What are the functions of poetry? So now my succeeding argument, right, would be based on these 2 points, right? Nature of poetry and functions of poetry, right? So discussing nature of poetry, Sidney first argues that he needs to defend poor poetry, which from almost the highest estimation of learning has become to be the laughing stock of children. So Sidney argues that once upon a time poetry was considered to be a great source of learning, But now poetry is considered to be a very trivial and very insignificant thing. And that is why Sidney sets his task of defending poets and poetry. So, discussing the nature of poetry, the first important argument that Sidney makes is that the poet is the maker. The poet is the maker, right? So, to support his idea, Sidney relies on the classical tradition. And Sidney reminds us that the Greeks used to call the poet poetis, which meant maker, one who makes, one who creates. And the Romans used to call the poet Vates, which meant the seer or the prophet. Right? So the poet does not imitate things which already exist, but rather the poet perceives something new from already existing things. In this sense, the poet is the maker. So the poet does not copy. The poet does not imitate in the sense of Plato, right? The poet does not in fact copy, or the poet does not imitate, but Sidney argues that the poet represents or makes something new in the sense of Aristotle, right? So in this sense, the poet is the maker. How is the poet is the maker? The poet makes or creates a new world. And how does the poet make or create a new world? The poet makes or creates a new world by dint of his imagination. Right? So Sidney here emphasizes the role of imagination in the poetic process. And my dear friends, later on, in the Romantic age, Coleridge was to give so much importance to imagination in the poetic process. Right? So Sidney, advocating the greatness of the poet, argues that the poet's world is golden, whereas the real world is brazen. The poet's world is golden, right? Better than the world of nature, or better than the real world. In this sense, the poet transcends nature, right? And makes a new world, a world full of truth and beauty, a world full of aesthetic pleasure, right? So Sidney argues that the lovers in the poet's world are truer. Friends in the poet's world are more constant. Warriors in the poet's world are more valiant. Princes in the poet's world are more right. And heroes in the poet's world are more excellent in every way. And my dear friends, flowers smell sweeter in the works of the poets than they do in the real gardens. This is the magic of the poet, because the poet is the maker, the poet is the creator, right? And the Bible says the God made the man in his own image. And the poet is the finest creation of God. And that is why there is so much natural creativity in the poet. Right? And in that sense too, the poet is the creator. He has got the natural talent to create a new world. Right? So, Sidney establishes the importance and the significance of the poet as the maker. And Sidney here opposes the dull mimetic idea that many philosophers used to hold. Right? So this is the first argument, important argument in apology for poetry, that the poet is the maker. Then what is the second argument? Sidney, discussing the nature of poetry, examines and compares poetry with history and philosophy. Dear friends, since ancient times, poetry, history and philosophy were considered to be the main subjects of learning. And that is why, following the classical tradition, Sidney here compares poetry with history and philosophy. Right? So how is history as a subject? Right? History is a subject that deals with the past, that deals with the particular, and that deals with the concrete, or that deals with the example. Right? How? Let me try to give you an example. Right? For example, if we read a chapter on Queen Elizabeth in a book of history, then who is Queen Elizabeth from historical point of view? The answer is, Queen Elizabeth means a particular queen of the past, of a particular country, who reigned during a particular period. So in this sense, history is a subject which deals with the bygone times, with the past, and which deals with the particular, with the concrete, particular examples. And now how is philosophy? Philosophy is a subject that deals with the abstract. For example, the soul, the good, the evil, the moral, the immoral. Right? So, Sidney argues that poetry is superior to history and philosophy because poetry covers both the abstract and the concrete. Poetry covers both the abstract and the concrete. How? Right? Let us try to understand. So thematically, poetry deals with love, harmony, unity. Poetry that way deals with the abstract. But at the same time, poetry deals with the concrete too. Take for example Othello. There are so many characters in Othello. And all the characters are the concrete example of how a human nature could be. Right? So, poetry is superior because poetry covers both the abstract and the concrete. Then poetry is far better and greater than history. because history deals with what has gone by, but poetry deals with what may come. Right? Poetry deals with the future. Right? And history and philosophy are the subjects that do not have universal appeal. In comparison to history and philosophy, poetry is a subject that has got universal appeal. For example, Wordsworth's poem on daffodils can appeal to all the readers of the world. But history and philosophy as subjects do not hold such appeal. In fact, all sciences do not have that appeal which poetry has, because poetry has got universal appeal. And poetry is far better and greater than history and philosophy, because poetry provides aesthetic pleasure. In comparison to poetry, history and philosophy do not provide aesthetic pleasure. Right? So, Sidney establishes the greatness of poetry in comparison to human sciences and argues that poetry is universal and poetry is far greater a subject than history and philosophy, because poetry deals with the universal truth. Poetry does not deal with the lies as Puritans held, but in fact poetry deals with the universal truth. Right? Then the third point, discussing the nature of poetry, Sidney talks about antiquity and universality of poetry. Poetry is a very antique, very ancient art, imparting knowledge to the mankind. And poetry is universal. Right? So poetry has been the first light giver to ignorance. Right? Tamso ma jyotirgamaya. We pray in our tradition. Right? So poetry has been the first light giver. Poetry is the mother of knowledge. And poetry is the first nurse of the noblest nations and languages that are known in the world. Right? So poetry has nourished all noble nations and languages of the world. This is the power of poetry. Right? So Sidney establishes the antiquity of poetry. And again, to establish the antiquity of poetry, Sidney takes the examples from the classical tradition. Right? So Sidney argues that in Greek culture, an ancient poet called Amphion was said to move stones through his poetry to build Thebes. And Orpheus, another Greek poet, was listened to even by the beasts. Right? In the ancient Roman culture, there have been poets like Livius and Ennius. In Italian culture, there have been poets like Dante and Boccaccio. And if I give you the example from our Indian culture, then we have Valmiki and Vyas, who respectively have written the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. So poetry is a very ancient art. And poetry is not only an ancient art, it is also a mother of learning. Right? And besides that, poetry has got universal appeal. A poem, for example, written on the love of a mother for her child in English language can appeal to readers of India, readers of Japan, readers of South Korea, readers of Poland, and readers of the rest of the corner of the world, because poetry has got universal appeal. Right? So if I explain using our Sanskrit tradition, then I would say poetry deals with the sthayi bhavas, the permanent emotions which Bharat Muni talks about in our Indian culture. And that is why poetry has got universal appeal. Right? So, Sidney discusses the nature of poetry. And discussing the nature of poetry, the main arguments of Sidney are: number one, the poet is the maker. Number two, poetry is superior to history and philosophy. Number three, poetry has got antiquity and universality. Right? And now I am coming to number four, significance. Fourth point, significance of various poetic genres. So every poetic genre has got its own specific quality. Right? For example, pastoral poem reflects the simplicity of life. Right? Elegy deals with the transient human existence. Right? Comedy deals with the common errors of life. Tragedy deals with the serious issues of life. Lyric sings of the human virtues and of the God. And epic poetry sings of heroic virtues and morality. Right? So every poetic form has its own significance. So consider to what extent Sidney defines poetry. He does not define poetry in general. He even goes further to define the significance of each and every type of poetic form that was prevalent during his times. Right? So, after discussing the nature of poetry, Sidney discusses the functions of poetry. And according to Sidney, there are two functions of poetry. Number one, to teach, and number two, to delight. Right? So, poetry teaches its readers. And by saying so, by arguing so, Sidney establishes the poet as a moral teacher, as a moral guru. Right? So poetry is not a mother of lies. Poetry is not an idle business. But poetry is very much helpful for human personality and helpful broadly to the society. Because every poet is a moral teacher. Right? So how does poetry teach? Right? So there is something called poetic justice in poetry, in which the good is always rewarded and the evil is always punished. So naturally, the readers learn the moral of life, right? So Sidney here argues that Plato was not against poetry. Plato was not against poetry in that sense that he wanted to banish all poets and all poetry from the Republic. Right? Plato wanted to banish bad poetry from the Republic. And employing rhetorical device, Sidney quite logically argues that all things can be well used or ill used. It ultimately depends upon the user. And employing expository style, Sidney even gives an example. Sidney says, with a sword, you can kill your father, and with a sword, you can protect your country. So the thing is not either good or bad, but the use is good or bad. So every reader must properly understand poetry and find the moral from the poetry, right? So Sidney here replies to all the Puritanists that poetry is not an idle thing. Poetry does not weaken mankind. Poetry is not detrimental to society. But in fact, poetry is very helpful for development of human personality. Right? So the first function of poetry is to teach the readers, teach about life, to give some moral message. Right? And the second function of poetry, dear friends, is to delight. To delight means to give pleasure, to give aesthetic pleasure. And aesthetic pleasure is considered to be the highest form of pleasure. When we read a Shakespearean sonnet, when we read Wordsworthian poem, we are lost, we are transported into the poet's world, into a world of joy, into a world of aesthetic pleasure. We quit the narrow spheres of our being while reading a particular poem, and we are transported into the world of the poet, and we feel ecstasy. This is the power of poem, that it gives aesthetic pleasure, right? So overall, dear friends, Sidney has talked about the nature of poetry and functions of poetry, right? Discussing nature of poetry, Sidney makes 4 points. First, the poet as maker. Second, poetry is far superior to history and philosophy. 3, poetry has got antiquity and universality. And 4th, significance of various poetic genres. So these are the 4 arguments discussing the nature of poetry that Sidney makes. And discussing function of poetry, Sidney propounds 2 functions: to teach and to delight the readers. Right? So my dear friends, this is how Sidney establishes the greatness of poet and poetry. and defends poetry against all charges of the Puritanists and moralists. Dear friends, the significance of Sidney's apology for poetry is that this is the example of theoretical criticism for the first time in the history of English criticism. Then, this is an example of constructive criticism in the history of English criticism. Then, apology is also an example of empirical criticism, because whatever Sidney, discusses about the nature of poetry and functions of poetry comes from his own experience as a poet. Right? So, dear friends, we generally call John Dryden to be the father of English criticism. But then, we also need to understand that Sir Philip Sidney was undoubtedly the very significant pioneer of English criticism. Thank you very much.